the average cager, the average person driving a car or pickup truck or whatever, a non-motorcyclist, how they view motorcycles and how they afford them, I don't know, respect, common courtesy, or just basic, simple awareness, situational awareness as they navigate the roadways and highways and byways of this beautiful United States and come into contact with motorcyclists. Hopefully not literally, but too often literally come into contact with motorcyclists. And what brought this all to the surface of my mind, and I felt like making a video about it, is about 2 weeks ago now, a friend of ours, Miss Vicky, I'll just say her first name, she runs a health food store around here. She manages it, been there a long time, good friend of myself and of Val's, good person. She's helped a lot, she's done a lot to give people chances, she's a good person. Her husband, about 2 weeks ago, was riding his 2017, I think it's a Heritage, but I'm not 100% sure. Is it? Maybe. And he was run over. He was run over by a truck. And the truck not only ran him over, but backed back over him because he didn't know what he had hit, so he backed back up and ran him over twice. So he ran him over first time and he backed back over him. And the result is that her husband is in the hospital, obviously. Bike's a total, but the insurance covers that for the most part. But he broke his neck, broke his back in a few places, and snapped his aorta right off of his heart. Now, that's not the first time I've heard of that happening from really serious impact accidents, even in cars. So that's some serious shit. And they medevaced him out of there. He's in the hospital. He's been borderline. They don't know that he's going to make it. And if he does make it, who's to say the quality of life that he's going to reestablish, how long that'll take, even the recovery process, if it's God's will that he does survive or that he does make it. So he's in my prayers. And hopefully some of you see this, might sense some goodwill, good feelings toward Vicky's husband. Hope that he comes out all right. So there's two different independent witnesses from two different vantage points that both testify that yes, he not only ran him over, but he backed back over him. And this just made me even more clear on the realization, which I've known for some time, that the way people regard you now when you're traveling around on a motorcycle, other vehicles, the way they view you is completely different today. Overall now, there are outliers everywhere. There are always people that were disrespectful, there are always people that are respectful, but I would say 25 years ago or so, maybe 30 years ago, it was a whole different air. And there's a number of reasons that I think I could draw a conclusion and say contribute to the change or the shift in the overall prevailing mentality or disposition towards motorcyclists on the road, but or disregard of motorcyclists on the road more often than not today, unfortunately. But 30 years ago or so, maybe even longer, when I first started riding, and I've been riding longer than I've been working out and lifting weights, longer than I've been lifting weights. And back then, Harley Davidson plays into part of it. I'm not saying they have any liability or any fault in the situation, but they had a stigma associated with these motorcycles, and for the most part, it was hardy individuals that rode these bikes, and self-reliant individuals, because these bikes were not the most reliable things in the world, and they were mechanically, could be a little bit troublesome, but there were people that embraced that and were totally loyal to the marquee and rode these bikes. But because even the dealerships at the time, you could go into a Harley dealer. I remember Harley Davidson of Baltimore in particular used to be in the city. And when you went into there, it was dirty tiles on the floor that were just stained from years and years of grease and tires rolling across them. And the guys were greasy, they were actual gearheads. And they may not always be in the greatest mood. They may be, it depends how their day was going, like any other human being. They were not professional salesmen, so to speak. I don't mean any disrespect there, but I'm going to say it was more real and down to earth. It's more grassroots. When you went into a Harley Davidson dealer back then, they were just like little independent shops, basically. You know, weren't these big boutiques like they are today. You know, I remember a time when I used to buy total Harley Davidsons because I get such a great deal on them. And today, I don't think they would sell you one like that from the dealer. I don't think they would do that just because of the liability factor or whatever other reasons. I don't think that they would. But it goes hand in hand. When Harley set out on this huge campaign, which was extremely successful, to kind of make their product more accessible to the mainstream, they did everything they could basically to get away from the outlaw stigma associated with their brand back in the day, which it was. And a lot of people at the time were pretty pissed off, you know, the hardcore people that had stuck by the brand, because it seemed like they were abandoning their core audience or their core supporters who had kept them in business through some lean times and stood by their product like doggedly faithful. I mean, do you see people walking around sporting, you know, Yamaha or Honda tattoos and things like that? You see Harley Davidson is very typical. It's typical. You see it a lot. You know, people are really, really sworn loyalists to the brand. It was more or less part and parcel of their way of life was the Harley Davidson, you know, bikers. And so back in the day, the guys that chiefly rode Harley Davidsons, there weren't so many on the road. They were not selling anywhere near as many motorcycles to the general public at all. So there were more true, real, what you would consider bikers on their bikes, on the motorcycles at the time. And in traffic, there weren't as many motorcyclists out, but I believe the stigma was so entrenched that most people in other vehicles sharing the roadways with motorcycles, and again, there are outliers everywhere, still rude people everywhere, people will totally disregard of other people's space or anything, but they kind of steered a little clearer. They gave them a little more leeway, which they did. Even guys that back then felt that, you know, cars were too intrusive and, you know, these people were reckless, and a lot of brothers got ran over and hit by cars, you know. Compared to today, I'd have to say that back then, from looking from today's vantage point, cars generally showed an overall, maybe it was intimidation. You could be one of the nicest guys in the world. You didn't have to be a bad guy. But if you had long hair, rode a Harley Davidson, maybe you had a beard, you know, and you probably looked somewhat unkempt just from the wind, if for no other reason. Tattoos and any of these other typical things that you might associate, especially back then with guys riding Harley Davidsons. And the bikes were loud, somewhat obnoxious at times in cases. I mean, I had some crazy motorcycles, you know, up sweeps and rigid frames and foot clutch, true suicide shifted motorcycles, which meant no front brake. Stopping consider that when you have to stop on hills and take off again, no front brake, but a foot clutch. There were a lot of what I would call real bikes on the road, and the men that rode these bikes, and in some cases women, but mostly men, they were regarded as they had more of an outlaw-oriented stigma associated with them from Joe Public. And I think that cars tended to give you a little bit more, a little wider berth when they saw you on the road. And again, outliers everywhere, there were still people disrespectful, all that. But I think back in the day, the response you would have got if you were intruding on someone's space and they were on a motorcycle, the response would have been a little bit more, I don't want to say aggressive or intimidating. I'm not trying to come off like, you know, everybody rode a bike back in the day was some kind of a badass troublemaker, but that probably was the case. The response you would have gotten from the typical guy back in the day, if you were encroaching on his space to a degree where he felt unsafe on a motorcycle, he would either just get the hell away from you. That was my tactic. I always stayed away from cars. I blast way up ahead of them because they tend to lump together. Today everybody has a motorcycle. This campaign's been going on so long that most people, younger people, don't even remember when it was anything other. But I do remember the difference. And now it seems today cars have no thought about who's on that bike, and they don't. They objectify it more, and they just see it as another vehicle. And people are overall generally rude anyway when they're in a vehicle. When they're in a car hurtling down the highway, they like to tailgate people, they shoot around people, they cut people off, they're playing on their cell phones, they're texting, they're doing everything in the world except being responsible for the space that they're occupying and who shares that space around them or who they may come too close with. And so I think today, more than ever, do loud pipes save lives? Probably so. Yes, probably so. And one thing that I am thankful for is law enforcement has never, and again, there are outliers everywhere. Yes, I have seen when they'll just have an excuse because they want to stop a particular group of motorcyclists for whatever reason or at an event, and they'll write a lot of tickets to generate revenue. Sometimes local law enforcement may, so things like this do happen. They'll look the bike over hard. I was stopped one time way, way far from home at an event many, many, many years ago on a chopper, and I got a whole handful of tickets and citations for all kind of safety violations, the way that bike was assembled. But more often than not, I'm pretty grateful. Law enforcement tends to turn a blind eye to drag pipes and lack of any kind of a muffler or any of that sort of thing on motorcycles, a loud exhaust. And I think that, a lot of folks out there, regular folks, that they're not part of the lifestyle, I guess, if you want to call it that, which I'm not trying to insult any of the old timers, because today everybody rides bikes. There are guys that ride Harleys. I just recently bought a new vest, and I wanted a heavy, heavy vest, and I wanted something that was going to be somewhat insulated. I wanted something that would serve a purpose. So, I got a better quality item, and I was real happy with it, and I'll show you that and talk about it in another video. But while I was looking, there's so many things out there, so many options today. You can actually buy a vest and be kind of an insta biker almost, where you could buy a vest that already came on along with like 14 patches already sewed on it. So you can already, and I saw one of these guys just yesterday, and it was one of those vests with all these generic patches in the same exact place because they're all exactly the same. And you buy the vest and it already comes with patches on it and every other thing. Which to me is just laughable, but they sell them, or they wouldn't produce them if they didn't sell them. So I'm not really laughing at anybody. I'm kind of just the whole situation to me seems surreal and amusing and kind of like Halloween almost. Like you think you're putting on a costume, but back in the day this wasn't the case, and motorcyclists were viewed in a different regard, and I think it was much safer. Much less likely to be run over by by a car or truck or something on your motorcycle 30 years ago than today. Today it's like almost an obstacle course if you're any place where it's congested and there's a lot of traffic. It's almost like a video game where it's you against the world, and you're trying to, if you're not situationally aware on a motorcycle today, you're in a lot of trouble, because it's very easy to get into a jam. You get run over today or run off the road or any other thing, and people, they really don't give motorcyclists common courtesy when they share the road with them. They kind of don't really share the road very well with them anymore. And again, there are people who do. There are people who ride motorcycles that also have a car and are cognizant of this, and so they're respectful. But most people today are not. And I think that loud pipes are a good thing. I think if you're riding a motorcycle today, that bike needs to be loud. Just that way, if you're not seen, maybe you'll be heard. Maybe it'll wake somebody up. It could save your life. It's very realistic. I don't think it's a ridiculous statement to make that loud pipes do save lives today. And in my opinion, the more obnoxious the presentation, probably the better off you are. I think the more noticeable you are to other motorists, probably the safer you're going to be, I would hope to say. And again, There's still people out there that are going to be oblivious, that are not situationally aware in any sense of the word. And it doesn't matter how loud the bike is or what it looks like or what you look like. They don't care. They'll still run you right over. It is what it is. Just be safe out there. Just this riding season, because it is more seasonal today with the newer or the more conventional type of rider that's out there. Of course, you got a lot of people that wear suits to work, and then they've got every piece of Harley-Davidson paraphernalia and stuff they can buy with Harley-Davidson written all over it, and they put all this gear on, and then they go out on their Harley, Insta-bikers. And I'm not saying anything's wrong with that, but the public has a total disregard, I think, today, overall, for motorcyclists. And they may love to watch a show like Sons of Anarchy and get behind characters that really kind of have no real redeeming qualities when you really think about it, that they're murderers and every other thing. And they still feel for them and love that kind of a show and support that, 100%. But in real life, totally disrespectful and no consideration at all for anybody on a bike. More often than not, too often. One other thing I want to throw out there really quickly about this video is just for a point of clarification. This is a Rocky Patel, by the way, awesome cigar. I think, to kind of wrap things up, back in the day when there was more of a stigma, I'm not saying it was a just stigma in any way, shape, or form. All I'm doing is just it's just my observation. I think back in the day when the majority of just the public driving around in cages, when they saw a motorcyclist or a biker, let's say, somebody they would consider to be a biker, that stigma was strong in the overall mindset of the public that that person is probably some level, somewhat of a criminal or outcast or an outlaw. He's on a motorcycle. He's probably up to no good some way, shape, or form. Nobody would want to be stigmatized that way, and I'm not saying that that applied across the board to everybody that rode a motorcycle. Most certainly did not, and it was not a fair thing. And it worked against you, sure, but nobody wants to be looked at like that, without call, without justification. But I think that when the overall prevailing mentality that the public viewed us like that, I think we were far better off as far as navigating the roadways, that we did get at least a little bit of a wider berth when they had to pass us or come around us or drive anywhere in our vicinity. Whereas today, they don't really think much of anything, is totally disregarded. And part of that equates to their fearlessness when it comes to getting a little way too close to you, most often than not. Sometimes I just want to ride my motorcycle and just have a good time and just relax, just unwind. I don't want, if there's one car comes along that I encounter, I don't want him to have to be right up on my ass, like that. Anyway, that's it. You guys have a great weekend.